part 2 of this interview, Graeme. We're sitting here at Workshop 17 in Harrington Street, and very excited to unpack some of the concepts and the nuances of what I'm just calling new law. I think you speak about it a lot, and I think a lot of people talk about law in different ways. But certainly I think what we've identified is that law is changing. It's changing irrevocably, and it's been changed by the kind of macro environmental factors, particularly from the digital economy perspective. And I think as a result of that, you started Whipping the Cat, which is this amazing entity. It's won a ton of awards, and you've done a lot of innovative work within the South African context, coming from a corporate law background to now really doing a lot of disruptive stuff with SMEs and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, Graeme, I just want to touch upon some of the basics, some of the fundamental stuff. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm looking to start a business, what are some of the major things that I would need to be aware of, and what are some of the, I suppose, legal basics that I would need to put in place upon starting this journey, this new journey of mine?
Yeah, Fred, I think like a useful starting point is probably to say, anyone can start a business at any time. You don't actually require any formality. So, if I have a skill, for example, as a plumber, and I start trading tomorrow as Graeme's Plumbing Services, and create a business card and a website, and start selling my skills, I can do that. And off I go. I have my little business.
Sure.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So there is no formality.
Would that be a sole proprietor?
And that would be exactly what would be referred to as a sole proprietor. So one can do that. And
so no legal formality, no legal entity required.
No legal entity.
You
correct.
As Graeme, you're the guy, and you take money and you
correct.
pay
correct.
me.
Correct. And there are lots of businesses that operate on that basis. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
What one just has to kind of unpack that and say, but if in doing that there is no difference between Graeme and Graeme's Plumbing Services. So if anything had to go wrong, so let's say, for example, I burst a pipe at my client's house and it flooded their entire property. They said it was my responsibility for having done that.
Sure.
And they now sued Graeme's Plumbing Services. Then Graeme, my assets would all be at risk for that. So
you're
my house, my
liable.
car, etc. Because
Gotcha.
there's no differentiation between Graeme's Plumbing Services and Graeme. It's just the one thing.
Gotcha.
So you in doing that, you do potentially expose yourself to personal risk in trading as yourself. So one of the ways to mitigate that risk is to form a company. So if you form a company, it creates a separate legal entity outside of yourself. That business could still be called Graeme's Plumbing Services, but just the name of the company. But if you run with my example, if something had to go wrong, the claim against the tenant whose pipe I've damaged would be against the plumbing service company.
Got it.
I mean, whatever assets that company has would maybe have to fulfill that claim, but my car, my house, all those kind of things are safe. So it just creates this different liability between your own personal liability and that in which you are trading.
So it's a separate entity. And what would that be termed? How would you term that?
Well, I mean, it's just
There's
separate.
different ways,
it's
obviously,
it's a separate legal entity, and I mean, in South Africa, what one would do now is just incorporate a company, which you can do it online using SIPC.
Okay.
You can also do it as a partnership, so you could actually create a separate legal entity by you and I perhaps partnering together.
Okay.
And in terms of that partnership agreement, kind of saying, okay, these are our assets that we're pooling, and we are creating a separate legal entity as a result of that.
So there's still ring fencing around that.
But there's a ring fencing around that, but the difficulty is partners themselves become jointly and severally liable.
Okay.
So you can go through that partnership and still get to the individuals.
Okay.
So the best way to do it is really to have a registered legal entity.
With shareholding amongst whoever's there, or you're 100% shareholding
correct.
if you're individual.
And that leads probably to another interesting point, because if you are a sole proprietor, you don't have anything to sell.
Sure.
Whereas if you have created a company and you create some value in it, you could sell that business or the shares in that business. It's tradable.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you're just Graeme's plumbing services, it's quite difficult to sell that, because you don't actually have the entity with which you can trade.
Okay, so that obviously is something in terms of your medium to long term thinking. When making that decision, you really have to take into account. Okay,
Correct.
And then with that in mind, what are the different types of entities? If you can just give us a quick kind of description, PTY and partnership and so on and so forth.
So we've already touched briefly on your sole proprietor, which is not a separate legal entity, and we've spoken a little bit about creating a company. So you would have your PTY Limited, Proprietary Limited.
Okay.
So it's limited by shareholding. You can have a partnership as well, which, as I said, the downside of a partnership is you're still actually operating as individuals. So although your assets of the partnership may be ring fenced, a third party can actually look through that partnership to actually hold people personally liable. So it is a way of doing stuff, but it has certain features that are similar to the sole proprietorship just joined. You will, in the market, you still get some guys that are trading CCs,
Gotcha.
Closed corporations.
Yeah.
So historically, there used to be a closed corporation which was supposed to be like a smaller business, or the easier way, less red tape of starting a business. But the New Companies Act did away with CCs, and the idea is that everyone should be able to have a PTY company with easy registration, etc. So you still get CCs, but you couldn't incorporate a new CC now anymore.
So just so that I understand it correctly, are you saying that now it's become easier to set up a PTY?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, yes.
In the past, when CC was like the accepted route for an easy
correct. CC
way
was
of doing
supposed to
it?
be the shorter, easier route. Now you can go straight to companies.
Okay, gotcha.
Correct.
And so if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm starting out, what would be the first step in terms of, okay, I've decided I'm going to start a PTY and that's my preferred route. What do I do? Where do I go? Do I go online? Do I speak to you? What are the ways in which I can actually do that?
So there are quite a couple of ways, and probably the easiest answer to that is look on Google and see kind of what can be done.
Okay.
But the reality is you could get a professional to help you. So you can get guys that they trade in companies. So they would set up what is called like shelf companies.
Gotcha.
And you just buy that company from them for whatever price they sell it, and everything's set up already. And then they'll just go about changing directors, shareholders, etc. for you. So that is an option. The idea is that it should be so easy these days using CIPC online. That's CIPC, part of the Department of Trade and Industry, that you could actually just do that online yourself and incorporate your own company. That really is the theory, and there's no reason why a person couldn't or shouldn't do that. Or else, companies like Whipping the Cat, we will do that. We offer that as a service, incorporating companies for people. And then again, what we'll do is engage with the guys and actually understand what it is they're looking for, kind of how many shares they want to issue. So it goes down into a little bit more detail as to where the end game may be. Otherwise, if you go through CIPC self-help, you may end with a fairly vanilla solution, which may be perfectly suitable, but you may be saying, well, actually, I'm looking at things slightly different, where you may need a little bit of professional advice on that.
Sure. So as a starting point, you can do it yourself. You can go to CIPC, you can go through the process, you can learn it yourself. And if you're an entrepreneur, more than likely you will figure that stuff out. Absolutely. And get started at least.
Correct.
And then over time, you could then potentially come to a legal professional and start to unpack that a little bit further and build more of a moat around that.
Yes.
Can I ask about that in terms of, say, building a moat, in terms of protecting yourself? What are some of the things that you'd want to protect yourself from right in the beginning?
So a very important thing in protecting is understanding, understanding what it is that you're doing, and what it is that you may have that you're looking to protect. So a common error that I see is people will register a company. So as part of that process, you would choose a company name. So for example, you choose Heavy Chef. just by registering that company name, you actually haven't got any protection in regard to the name Heavy Chef. You just have a company with the name Heavy Chef. But that wouldn't prevent anyone, for example, of registering a trademark of Heavy Chef. And that person would be able to use the Heavy Chef name,
So
notwithstanding the fact
gotcha.
that you have that company name.
Gotcha.
And I think there's often a mistake that people make, that thinking that they've registered a company name, that they actually own the brand name.
Sure.
And it's not. So protecting your identity of what it is that you're creating is one of the things that you need to look at.
How would you do that?
So a brand protection is typically created by registering a trademark.
Okay.
So examples of trademark would be Nike, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, etc., the kind of big brands that you're aware of. So those actual names in words, the logos that are identified with the swoosh, the golden arches, those are all things that are protected via a trademark,
Gotcha.
which gives that company the exclusive right to use that name and logo in certain spaces.
Okay.
So if you are looking to create a brand, a product that you want to have exclusivity of in respect of owning it, it's very important that you get that trademark registration. And again, there are some self-help tools that can be done in respect of that. It's a service that we provide, and you get lots of like IP or intellectual property law firms that would also be able to assist through that process.
Gotcha.
Slightly more expensive, so cost of registering the trademark, ballparkish somewhere between kind of like 5,000 and 12,000 rand.
Okay. For nationally, right? Because there's also a difference between national, international, and
correct.
so on.
So
and
that would be national,
regions.
correct. So trademarks come in categories. So for example, kind of in like food and beverage, if you owned a trademark in respect of food and beverage, someone would actually be able to use that same or similar trademark in an industrial space. So you actually only own the protection in regard to certain areas that are classes that are specified as registered trademark areas.
And I'd imagine that one way, or at least one element to creating that protective moat around you would be to go straight through to GoDaddy and just register every single domain name of that name that you can possibly muster. And I suppose that would make it very difficult for somebody to come and start ripping off your name if you have ownership in the online domain.
Yeah. So again, very important point that you make in regard to protection from an online or domain registration. But again, what one needs to be mindful of is that the trademark would actually trump that. So if I owned the trademark, for example, McDonald's, and you registered a website that was mcdonalds.co.za, as the trademark owner, I could force that site .co.mcdonalds.co to be deregistered because I own the proprietary right in the name McDonald's. You can't use it from a website perspective.
So you can put a legal claim upon that.
Correct.
For the domain in terms of the top level domain, but also in terms of maybe the social accounts, the social profiles.
Correct.
If somebody's registering McDonald's SA on Instagram and that sort of thing, right?
Correct. So then McDonald's will be able to enforce its right as the owner of the brand to prevent the use or illegal use of those names.
Sure.
Because of the trademark protection that they get.
Okay.
So it's a very important point that you're touching on. Because people often get that wrong, that they think because they own the company name or they've registered the domain name, they have the right to use that.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily
the
case.
They can be taken away in
Correct.
terms of the claims from a trademark perspective.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. So that's really important. So the brand, effectively, there are certain mechanisms that you can take, and the most important one is the trademark, right? And then obviously everything kind of cascades from there.
Yes.
And then, okay, so now that we've established our name and our company and the company type and the services that we provide, are there any other protective measures or preventative or preemptive measures that you would recommend to a company that's starting out?
Yeah, so I think if you just look at it, what is it that you're trying to do? So typically you're probably going to sell a good or a service.
Sure.
So you're now presenting something to the market, something that you're trying to commercialize. So you need to figure out on what terms am I selling this good or service? And it could just be on a handshake. Here, I will sell you this coffee cup. and that's good enough. But is it necessary to actually just have some terms and conditions that govern that relationship? So if things had to go wrong, or to avoid any confusion, just to make sure that when we shook hands, that we actually meant the same thing, and that we were buying and selling exactly what we agreed. Without kind of over-lawyering it, it may be a good idea to have some T's and C's in place to say, when you buy this from me, understand this is what I'm going to be doing, and this is what I expect you to do.
Okay.
Those could be, simple payment terms, what I'm responsible for doing, what I'm not responsible for doing, etc. It just helps de-risk that interaction between you and the customer.
How formal does that have to be? I mean, say for example, can it just be an email exchange? It's like, hey, I've got this to sell, this is the cost, and the person says, I accept your the cost of that and the terms that you've created in this email.
Yes.
Is that enough?
Yeah, so that's again, you don't need formality. You and I can agree something sitting right here, as long as we've agreed on essential terms: who, what, when, why, how much.
Okay.
Then we have agreement. Where things get a little bit tricky is if my recollection of what we agreed is slightly different to your recollection of what we agreed. Then you can have a disconnect, which is why you tend to put stuff down in writing just to record it.
Sure.
So we are on the same page, literally. That could be in an email. So saying, Fred, I'm just recapping, we agreed the following things, you say yes. Then we've got that now as kind of evidence of what we agreed.
I think that's a great lesson. I think I've seen it with all the entrepreneurs we work with in Heavy Chef. I've seen it time and time and time again, of that verbal discourse that's misconstrued, misinterpreted on two different sides. The thing is just to have it in writing in some way, shape or form, somewhere that you can then go and refer back to as a stake in the ground.
And that may just be as simple as an email saying, let's just recap our conversation and jot it down. And we're not talking necessarily about legal liability and suing and the whole thing getting messy. It's just to make sure that we're on the same page.
Just have it in writing,
so just so that everything goes smoothly. So we aren't avoiding any kind of legal risk down the line. You come back to me and say, well, Graeme, I got your email. You said, pay on 30 days. I thought we spoke about 60, and then we clarify that. So it's just a recorder. So I would absolutely advocate, and it's not trying to over-lawyer, over-complicate, or my word's not good.
Gotcha.
It's none of those things.
It's simple
really
principles.
It's just kind of making sure that we have agreement. And
the beauty of, I think, today's age is that we have these mechanisms like email and even WhatsApp, which you can then, just clarify those basic tenets of what was discussed and get some kind of discourse going that you clarify the various details and nuances of the discussion and the offering.
But if you take that to the next level, if we've just spoken about doing that deal, then it comes that you're doing it again and again and again and again, then actually it makes sense, instead of writing that email confirming our discussion, that you just have your kind of simple one-pager or two-pager that says these are the terms. So
some kind of a central document.
Then you've got your central document and say, okay, we've had this discussion, these are the terms. So that's where you're getting now into a little bit more kind of formality of the contract, because you're kind of evolving and progressing. So having that contract, may be the way to go. And that may be an online click, agree, accept terms. If you're doing stuff online, it may be something that you email a person. Again, just figure out what works from you from a business perspective. But it is a natural evolution and a smart one to have those T's and C's that just set out what it is that you're doing.
Awesome. Okay, so then if we can then just talk about when two people come together, and let's just say they decide to do some kind of a partnership. I mean, a lot of what we see in the entrepreneur space is disputes between partners. From the outset, when two people go into partnership, whether in terms of taking equity in a company or whether to do business together in two different entities, what are some of the things that you would advise people coming together to put in place to avoid that sort of conflict down the line?
Yeah. So again, we're going to pick up on a similar kind of theme about kind of making sure that you have an agreement as to what it is. So you and I can agree to collaborate and do something together, and we start off with the best intentions. We're very much on the same page. But my circumstances may change. In a year's time, I have I don't have the amount of money that I thought I was going to have to continue with this venture, or I need to extract money out of the business at a time that you're looking to put money into the business. You want to grow, I think we're fine where we are. And these aren't things that you would necessarily have thought about right from the outset, because the business is going to grow and evolve. So I think having documents that kind of set the framework of what's been agreed and how you're going to deal with things going forward is very important.
Okay.
So, we touched on the concept of partnership, and partnership does have risk because it's kind of, it's a looser relationship. If you're going into the more formal company and you're saying, okay, we're having a shareholders agreement, all the stuff can be set out in what's also called a memorandum of incorporation, MOI, that sets those parameters. So running with my example, we may have a situation that you say, we're both 50-50 shareholders in the business, but if more money is needed and you, Fred, are putting the money in and I, Graeme, don't want to, then the contract makes provision for a dilution. So maybe you go up to a 60% shareholding and I'm now 40 because you funded more, I haven't been able to. So getting those mechanisms in place, the framework in which those dynamics can evolve, I think is very important.
Upfront,
and we see quite a lot of that where circumstances change. So where we all think we're leaving in the common interest and this is where we're going to get, that changes due to the business changing, due to our personal circumstances changing. And if you don't have those mechanisms in place to be able to unlock that as you evolve, people butt heads very quickly.
Sure, and I suppose that's the sort of thing where you would most certainly, the more complicated that framework gets, you would need assistance from a third party just to ensure that everybody's, as you say, on the same page, and to collate and curate that into a central document.
Yeah, and I think, Fred, sometimes for guys starting out their own business, they don't know what they don't know. So we've seen this movie before, and we've seen where things potentially go wrong. So it's just sitting with those guys, girls, and saying, what will happen in these scenarios? How do you see this playing out? How would you like this to work? And they're just making sure that you kind of put those mechanisms in place to enable the business to flow smoothly, as you're kind of navigating through the growth and change of that business. So it's asking the right questions, understanding, making sure that people are aligned is quite an important step in making sure that you get that right. And it's not easy because for your typical entrepreneur, all they want to do is sell, get going, get pumping, and actually this just seems like a bit of bureaucratic nightmare. Like we don't really need it now. We'll sort this out later. It's not going to happen. But when it does, then it's a little bit too late. Things become a little bit edgy and tricky, and but we thought. So just that little bit of stitching in time. Is useful.
So it's that admin bit that you just got to get through, and Lord knows entrepreneurs love admin. So I think that's where I suppose again and again and again you just get cracking, you get stuck in, you start working, you get stuck in the weeds, and then all of a sudden you get properly stuck.
Yes.
If you haven't done that administrative, preemptive stuff early on, and I suppose that's where you really. Firms like Whipping the Cat can really help.
Yeah.
And I want to just then talk about let's just fast forward a little bit and get to a point where, assuming that now this entity that we've created has achieved a modicum of success, and there's either a point that you want to take upon investment or actually sell the entity outright.
Yes.
A whole bunch of questions come up there, and I want to just quickly talk into that. What are some of the preventive or at least the measures that you can take just to protect yourself at that stage when people start having those conversations and those sort of interactions?
Yeah, so again, I think an important starting point is and to kind of quote some of like Covey, kind of begin with the end in mind.
Okay.
So if you can just kind of think about where this could go, and make sure that you got those building blocks in place at the beginning. So if you have structured a company, that you have got shares, you have got something that's tradable, you've already started on the journey that says, okay, I can unload this at some later point. It's things like having decent accounting systems in place, doing the best you can, have maybe Excel to start, it doesn't matter what it is, but have those systems in place. Keep your books separate so that when someone is looking to buy, it's not like, okay, well I paid for for this jacket pocket, and I paid for my business expenses from this jacket pocket. Because when someone wants to buy that business, the whole thing is a mess, and your life is entwined with your business. So keeping those separate lines between what's your business and kind of what's your personal life, I think is quite important.
Gotcha.
as a starting point. And then if you have those building blocks in place, you have something to sell. You can sell your business, you can sell your shares, but if you haven't created that from the beginning, you can't it's very difficult to retrofit.
If you haven't got those frameworks and that transparency and that accountability from the outset,
yes,
it's going to be very difficult to kind of retrofit it at the end, right?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
And then if you have that company structure, creating more shares within the business, bringing in investors, whether it's third-party funding, whether it's equity, you have the structure to be able to do that. And if you don't have that structure, then you don't have the structure, and it's very difficult. So if you're looking for a funder, some private equity guys, a bank, whatever the case may be, they're going to say, well, show me what you've got in terms of your corporate structure, your shares, etc. And if you don't have anything, most of those guys will just turn away. So having that stuff in place is, unfortunately, really important if you think you're going to grow, and most entrepreneurs want to. So
for sure,
get those blocks in place.
Okay, so lastly, and just to close out, Graeme, I think you've obviously got a heck of a lot of experience, and you've spoken to tons of entrepreneurs in your illustrious career. Can we just talk about some of the salient points, some salient lessons, some leave behinds before we close out this interview?
Yes, I think some of them we touched on. So some of the salient points that I think is begin with the end in mind. Think about that big picture when you're lying in your bed and you're saying, this is where my business is going to be one day.
Gotcha.
So, okay, well, what do I need to make sure that I've got all my building blocks in place? Okay. So that may require a little bit of formality, setting up the legal entity, getting some reasonable accounting in place, even if it's your own accounting system, some online stuff, Excel spreadsheet, but have something that ring fences and shows what your accounting is. Creates a separate legal structure. Don't risk your whole life in doing your business. Your business and your life need to be separate from a legal perspective. Then think about like your end product, what it is you're selling. Make sure that you've got some contracts, some legal documents in place that protects you in regard to the stuff that you are selling. In regard to stuff that you're buying in, make sure that you know what it is that those terms and conditions are. So people get caught often. Entrepreneurs will start, they need equipment, they need things, they buy that stuff, but they sign contracts not knowing what you're signing. You're locking yourself potentially into long agreements, excessive penalties, that kind of stuff. Understand what it is that you're buying in. So you've got the selling side, you've got your buying inside. Make sure that you understand what that risk is. When that buying in stuff could also include people. So are you resourcing your business? Are they employees? If they are, figure out, do you know what you need to do from an employment perspective? Are you compliant with the law? If they are independent contractors, understand what that means.
Sure.
Don't think you can say, oh, I'll try this person as an independent contractor when in fact they're an employee. It's a tricky area of law, and you can wing it, but you can come unstuck very, very easily.
I certainly think that's where you do need help, right? You need help to put at least those initial structures in place. So that you can avoid the potential pain when you're building up a team and you start to rapidly scale.
Correct.
Cheapers, you can get unstuck
very quickly. And
right?
it's, in our experience, it's a very common kind of like flashpoint where things go wrong is from the employment side as well. So don't underestimate the importance of just having, again, the structure in place in regard to people that you're using to grow your business, whether employees, contractors, software developers. Understanding who's doing what, who owns what.
Sure.
Those are very important things. And I understand as I say this, it all starts sounding very formal and daunting and intimidating. But hopefully, if you work with the right people, they can just help you navigate those waters in a smooth way, in a sensible way, in a way that's not going to like stymie your business, but is actually going to enable it to grow.
I suppose is putting in the hard yards right up front so that it becomes a lot easier down the line, right? In terms of growing that team, particularly when it comes to other people.
Yeah.
I suppose all of this relates to other people at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
if I had to summarize all of the lessons that you've unpacked here, I would say that it's got to be put the agreements in writing. You know, have something that's there, that's accountable, and that you could refer back to.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and I think that is the case. But what I would like, you know, people to kind of understand and really take to heart is that doesn't have to mean like legal mumbo jumbo and kind of be like, you know, a real inhibitor to the business. You know, that can be done if all your stuff is done in a way that's understandable in plain language, just writing stuff that says, yes, we're just agreeing this stuff, guys. It doesn't have to be, you know, 50-page documents of legalese in Latin. Then it's those things then become kind of part of what it is that you're doing. And tools for your business, as opposed to obstacles or these unnecessary things that are done and just like shoved in a drawer. They really should be part of the fabric of what it is that you're creating.
That's quite liberating, I suppose. So it doesn't need to have this kind of weird mystical language. It just needs to be clear, it needs to be definitive, and it needs to be mutually agreed upon.
Correct.
And then you're golden, right?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Graeme, thanks so much, and thank you for your continued support of Heavy Chef. It's been such an honor to work beside you and to have your continual input in terms of our growth as well, and just amazing to see the success of Whipping the Cat, and long may it continue.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks for your time.
Nice one.